Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Ray's Reviews. And in today's video, we will talk about Celsius officially declaring bankruptcy. Now, I made two videos in the past on how I was optimistic about the survival of Celsius. And in today's video, I will talk all about what happened and what this means next. So stay tuned and let's go.
We reported last night that Celsius had started notifying state regulators that it was filing. It comes a month after Celsius froze accounts for what it says is 1.7 million customers, blaming extreme market conditions.
Okay, so Celsius has officially declared a voluntary Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and this is official. It is on the official company website. An official email was sent from Celsius and also on their Twitter. And Celsius was quiet for almost a month, and when they finally broke the silence with their news, a lot of people were really surprised and shocked because it looked like Celsius continued to pay down their debt in all these different DeFi protocols. And the first question I'm sure on everyone's mind is, are you going to lose your crypto assets on Celsius? And I'll address that a little bit later on the video with some of my thoughts. But first, let's talk about what is a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So this is a voluntary Chapter 11 bankruptcy and not a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 11 bankruptcy is designed to allow struggling businesses to restructure their finances and maximize the return to their creditors and owners. It is a reorganization plan that allows a company to continue to operate, versus something like a Chapter 7 bankruptcy where they're unable to repair their financial situation and there are forced liquidations. Now, just a week ago, Voyager Digital also announced their financial restructuring plan with a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and funny enough, Kirkland & Ellis is the legal counsel for both Voyager Digital and Celsius. So it looks like Celsius is following in similar footsteps to Voyager Digital. Although keep in mind, their situations may be completely different in terms of the amount of assets that they have. Chapter 11 reorganizations are never the exact same for different companies. I know Voyager Digital already proposed how they were going to pay back depositors in one of their official press releases, but it could be completely different for Celsius. Now, I won't say that bankruptcy is ever a good thing, but there have been cases of successful Chapter 11 reorganizations in the past. Two of the most notable ones are like General Motors and Marvel Entertainment. General Motors, obviously in 2009, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Today, they're stronger than ever. Marvel Entertainment filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2006, and this was before when they were primarily in the comic book business and before they transitioned into the movie making business, which is obviously a multi-billion-dollar industry. Of course, General Motors and Marvel Entertainment had a physical product to sell to people, so you could argue that it's a completely different situation, as Celsius is more of a service product. Now, the silver lining of the Chapter 11 bankruptcy is transparency, because before Celsius was operating under shadows, not revealing any information. This is no longer possible under Chapter 11. Everything is transparent and we can find out the exact assets on their balance sheet and what is going on. The biggest problem with Celsius before is that we never knew any of their positions because they were a private, unregulated company that did not have a requirement for disclosure. Obviously, they claimed that the company was simply lending the crypto to investors that were willing to pay a premium for it. Is that the real case, or were they taking risky bets with cash from your funds? Now, their business model worked during the bull market when depositors wanted interest yield and not cash on hand. But after all, the bull market is over. It's really easy to cover up problems in a bull market, but when a bear market hits, we really need to have that full level of transparency. So let's talk about a couple of things. So first off, a couple of things. Why did Celsius continue to pay off their DeFi loans before filing for bankruptcy? Many people were treating this as a positive sign that Celsius was going to be able to emerge from this. It is a little strange, but perhaps they wanted to pay off all their DeFi loans to get back all their collateral, so they have a clear answer to the true assets on their balance sheet before they go to bankruptcy court. And second question, as a Celsius depositor, what are your rights? And as a depositor, you are an unsecured creditor, which means you will get your money back in the end, unfortunately. Now, first and foremost, I want to address how it is okay to be deeply disappointed on how this entire situation played out. I am myself personally as well. If you want to watch my last two videos about Celsius, I was highly optimistic about the survival of Celsius. If you want to say I was wrong, I'm happy to admit it. After all the moves they were making up to the bankruptcy announcement seemed to be positive in my eyes. Maybe I have optimism bias. I am generally a pretty positive, forward-thinking person. Now, Chapter 11 is definitely not the end of the world, but I agree for them to kind of go silent and just a few weeks later announce bankruptcy was not the move I was expecting, and it was a little disappointing. And just overall, CeFi, I'm a little bit disappointed in CeFi. After all, cryptocurrency had the potential to solve a lot of real-world financial problems. Now, I myself have paid my virtual assistants who live in rural, unbanked areas. These are areas that have no traditional banks. And as a real-world use case of cryptocurrency and a solution to inflation and their inability to access financial services, cryptocurrency and neobanks like Celsius were supposed to give these people that opportunity to save and advance financially in life. This was their lifeline, and one of Celsius' promises was that you could withdraw assets at any point in time. But enough about that said, let's really go and talk about the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, starting off with the worst case scenario. And let's first talk about the anger in the community. I really don't blame you. There are some users of Celsius that are saying this entire whole situation is a Ponzi scam and that Alex Mashinsky is a fraud. They are saying that Celsius is starting to look like the next Sahara finance. Now, there is definitely some truth to the fact that crypto needs to get severely regulated to protect depositors. I will address the Ponzi scam rumors though. If you don't know anything about Sahara finance, there's a great documentary about it on Netflix called like Bad Boys Billionaires. There's a little bit of Hollywood storytelling to it, so maybe some of the truth is a little bit bent, but Sahara was a corporation in India that was born in the 1980s that really wanted to seek financial inclusion through investments from the unbanked, which is really similar to a mission statement from Celsius. They targeted people in like the nooks and corners of India. These were places, rural areas that traditional banks typically wouldn't go to. And the business model was pretty simple. You get people to invest with Sahara Finance through these chit funds, and then you got interest at the end of your term like clockwork. You could always deposit out at the end of your term, but these people were always advised to keep it invested, and after all, why wouldn't they? Interest kept coming in like clockwork, at least on paper. The chairman and founder at that time, Subata Roy Sahara, indicated that he created Sahara to serve small investors who were outside the banking system. And people in India treated him like a god at that time. And at one point, Sahara was one of India's largest private companies with over 1 million employees. They were also a sponsor of the India cricket team. This company was huge, but at the same time, they wanted to be excluded from regulatory practices. Now, everything was going great until they tried to go public. And once they decided to do that, long story short, regulators discovered Sahara to be a financial scam. Subata Roy went to jail, and it took years before some form of repayment occurred for its investors. And even today, there are investors who have not fully recuperated their funds. It ended up being a big, giant Ponzi scam at the end. Now, I'm personally not saying that Celsius is a Ponzi scam, but I'm certainly understanding why some people would think this way. After all, you can't really argue that there aren't some parallels. You have, first of all, you have that visionary leader. You have a mission statement of helping the unbanked. You have a privately held company that is free from regulations. You have a cult-like following who are really there to keep getting more and more people to join. And ultimately, both companies ended up going bankrupt and collapsing. Now, unfortunately, if this worst case situation plays out, I'm sorry to say it, but it will be a while before we recuperate any of our funds, because as a depositor, you and me are unsecured creditors. Just like in the Mt. Gox bankruptcy, there are people that still have not received all their funds. And ultimately, you don't really have any crypto in Celsius. You have a claim to this Celsius bankruptcy. Now, I hate to end this video on such a negative note, so let's talk about positive scenarios and how there could be light at the end of this tunnel. With the Chapter 11 bankruptcy, everything that is now going on with Celsius is now transparent. The company is still allowed to operate like normal with some creditor protection, and all the information is now public. I'll leave a link below to all the Celsius network filings on Stretto. You can actually click on the link below in the description to kind of read up some of these documentation for yourself. But let's take a look at this situation next with a little bit more optimism. So, like I said before, we had a lot of speculation and FUD. But in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, everything is transparent, including statements that are coming from Celsius directly. Now, I went through these packets, and some of the highlights that I picked up from reading the documents were the following. Celsius' early success was not without its hiccups. The amount of digital assets on the company's platform grew faster than the company was prepared to deploy. As a result, the company made, in hindsight, what proved to be poor asset deployment decisions. Some of these deployment activities took time to unwind and left the company with disproportionate liabilities when measured against the unprecedented market declines. Okay, so after reading that, basically Celsius, looking back in hindsight, made some really poor asset deployment decisions. They took on some risks that unfortunately didn't work out. But also keep in mind that after Luna collapsed, trust in crypto was at an all-time low, and over $1 billion was withdrawn from Celsius' platform over 5 days in May. And some of this was caused by false rumors and FUD that did ultimately lead to the decline of Celsius. And finally, the Celsius business model was centered on deploying digital assets to generate income for Celsius, its operations and growth. Some of this crypto was tied in long-term and illiquid crypto deployment activities, and after the market dropped, Celsius could not support both customer withdrawals and posting additional collateral to meet its obligations. Basically, Celsius made mistakes. They undercalculated the probability and magnitude of the crypto winter caused by the collapse of Luna. They also had some 3AC exposure, but it looks like their loss was only $40 million, which is less than Voyager Digital and some other companies. There were some other events, but it also seemed like they understood that their business model was flawed and they couldn't operate successfully in the long term with a zero fee model like withdrawing. And they were also looking to kind of reduce some of the reward rates for their crypto assets yield. But they were a little bit too late in deploying some of these decisions. And the net impact of this, it looks like they're a little bit about $1.2 billion in the hole. I would actually net out their Cell token assets with their Cell liabilities, as this number is going to dramatically fluctuate, and I think the hole is probably closer to $1.5 or $1.6 billion. Now, some people were saying the worst case scenario was getting back pennies to the dollars. It doesn't look like that's the case after looking at these financials. Hypothetically, this is just completely me speculating. If you were to completely liquidate the company and after legal fees and everything, you could hypothetically get back 50 to 60% of your crypto assets just by looking at these financials. And obviously that's not an outcome that a month ago anyone would have been happy with. But at the same time, if you treat things from a brighter perspective, this company is definitely not worth zero. One thing to keep in mind is also that the crypto bull market will eventually return. Essentially, the court could end up with crypto that is worth much more than when the company filed for bankruptcy, and this whole situation kind of flips around. There is perhaps some optimism that through the Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the recovery of assets could be much more. But in conclusion, I do think that CeFi firms like Voyager Digital and Celsius made business mistakes that caused them to be in this situation. But more importantly, where do we go from there? I will continue to monitor the situation closely and provide updates. There will be a part 2 to this video. I want to analyze the financial data a little bit deeper, but I don't want to make this video too long. What do you guys think about the entire Celsius situation? Are you guys prepared for like a worst case scenario, or do you guys have optimism that this Chapter 11 will allow Celsius time to kind of restructure, rebuild the business, and make good on their promises to depositors like you and me? What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Once again, I will make another video about this. Thank you again for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.